So this is, now you've heard a little bit of the challenges that lie before us, and so now let's see if we can explore some of those. There's something that nobody mentioned that at least that I didn't hear. The deaf guy probably didn't hear everything. Nobody mentioned Internet of Things. And you know, there's this avalanche coming. There's a whole bunch of devices that are programmable and that can communicate on the net. People grab the software from random places like GitHub and they throw it in. And some folks just build these devices and sell them, take your money, and then don't say anything after that. They have no interest in supporting it or repairing mistakes in the software. I'm worried not about artificial intelligence, but about bugs in software that populate billions of devices that are interacting and that we rely on because we've handed autonomy over to the software that's running in those things. Would you care to opine on this at all?
Yeah, we're doing quite a lot of work on this. We being the university, my group, but also this is part of the Web Science Initiative because it's crucial. I mean, this week, the UK government is looking at Huawei installations, which is more the infrastructure than the Internet of Things, but it's the same. You know, these all come from China, and I'm a great science fiction person. I always think of Doctor Who, when suddenly you get a rise up of a population because the chips in something has, you know, I think there's a scary scenario here. The thing about the web, it's socio-technical, and people are not. You can't work out. You can't know what people are going to do with the technology. So that's why it's so hard to predict. Now we're throwing this whole new layer into the mix, and the saving grace at the moment is the one thing about the Internet of Things is it isn't an internet. They can't all talk to each other. They're in silos a bit at the moment, but that is coming as the standards develop.
Well, actually, there won't be silos unless you make the silos. So there's no absolute guarantee that there are silos.
No,
so be careful about that.
No, I know that. But at the moment, it's a commercial world that is coming into the mix of. We started calling them cyber-physical social machines, in the fact that the web's a social machine, and now we're getting cyber-physical. And I find this, it adds a complexity that I find difficult to get my head around.
So two things. First of all, Tim, yesterday you mentioned solid, and you mentioned control of information and putting that control where you thought it belonged. Does that also apply to IoT? Should we be thinking of IoT devices that control?
Yeah, I was going to say, in fact, that I suppose the two principal issues with the IoT, particularly domestic IoT, when you have something in your house. First is, if it's on the internet, it has to be upgradable. It has to have paths if you have something like the power of a Raspberry Pi. This is something that the Brits will all know about. So a cheap computer which you can use, you can put them all over your house. That is a Unix machine. It can be upgraded in principle. If you have something which is more like the power of an Arduino, typically you program it with a USB and then you leave it running. And if there's a bug in that, so if you have millions of those all over the internet and somebody discovers a bug, we are toast. We will be open to huge denial of service attacks. Yeah. You will be open to attacks in your house. All your private information will be ransomed. So people get used to the fact that they had to download new software for their laptop. Now then they got used to, after a while. Suddenly there was a time when phones became upgradable things. Now, you wouldn't have a phone. It would be, if you had a phone which couldn't be upgraded when people discovered software bugs, that would be horrible. That would obviously be a horrible idea. Now you have to think about that, about everything which is you plug in inside your house. Every little fridge, every little milk bottle, every little garden sprinkler, and so on. So that's a big part of it. And the other part is, yes, the Solid project is all about you having control of your data. Where is it not more evident and urgent than you should have control of your data for the gadgets that you plug in inside your house? So there are lots of architectures. We can do this. You can build software into a thermostat so that it is a little solid server, and it wakes up and says, and it waits for you to give it a key to trust, and allows you to talk to it so that nobody else can talk to it and find out the temperature in your house. We can do that. We can also build a system so that you can build all your temperature sensors so that they point to a solid hub. And you have this standard solid hub which stores all your data and all the things, and you program all the things to feed the data into that, and you control your hub, and you control how it connects to it, and you can do all that within your house. You can synchronize it with the cloud, which you trust. So you can build that, but we need to do that in the universities. We can do it. We're doing it, but then when you actually go out and look for a real product, what's wrong with this picture? I go to buy I want to be able to open the front door with my phone because I don't like keys. Physical keys make holes in my pockets. So whereas the phone has nice rounded corners. So I want to be able to go up to it. I want to be able to do a Bluetoothy thing or something. In fact, I can buy an electronic bolt and it's on Wi-Fi. So it's on Wi-Fi. I go on Wi-Fi. I log into the app, and the app goes to the cloud to make sure that the password that matches the one in the cloud. I authenticate with the person in the cloud, and the cloud unlocks my front door. Anything wrong with this picture? So we really need to get a hold of in the physical devices in your home. Totally, they should talk to you directly. Any cloud that they go through is on your construction, and it should go to it should be controlled by you. So,
can I add to this? First of all, they don't make women's clothes with pockets in, right?
Yes.
So women are 50% of this internet. I'm picking up on Mylin's point. We need to design devices that work for women. But the other thing I want to say is you don't just exist in your home. You exist in your office or your university or your hospital. You talk wonderfully about this, Vint. The idea of a smart city I find quite incredulous if you don't worry about who's got your data.
Yeah.
It gets so complicated, and if you don't adopt a solution, something like Solid, then we think we've got a difficult world today with the social networks. It will be that on steroids in anything like a smart city.
So let's, one thing I need to remind you about, and that's that as you build in mechanisms to protect, you also build in automatic potential for denial of service.
Yes.
When you lose your key, when you've forgotten your password, we are building what may be a very fragile, brittle kind of future that we will rely heavily on infrastructure to work. So I've been thinking about what properties do we want to emerge out of this online environment. Some of these properties will sound very familiar. Reliability. You don't want light switches that work 75% of the time, or toilets that only flush 85% of the time. We want reliability out of the system, not only IoT, but more generally. We're looking for privacy. That's a property we would like to be reassured about. We're looking for security. We're looking for safety. And so, these are among the properties that I think we should feel responsible to produce for people that are relying on these systems. Well, that raises the interesting question, what happens when those properties fail? Who should be responsible?
Fixing.
Where does liability lie? Now, it's easy to kind of imagine the scenario where you have a self-driving car and it runs into something, and then you get this question, is the programmer responsible? Is the car maker responsible? Is somebody else responsible? What happens if your refrigerator attacks somebody, do you send the refrigerator to its room, without feeding it or something? Or you unplug it, as punishment, but then all of your ice cream melts. It's not exactly clear where liability should be placed. And I suggest that that's going to be the topic of a lot of debate, possibly in legal settings, before we can sort out what makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about the other problem that shows up.
Oh, by the way, can we talk about just while you're there, while you've opened that little, can I just throw in, when you're looking at, one of the times when I feel I don't know who to blame is when I've got a lovely phone and I am talking over a high bandwidth net that I paid a lot of money to, somebody in Europe who's paid a lot of money for their high bandwidth connection, and we are having incredibly high resolution video conference for 10 minutes and it stops. And it stops. And I paid money for a connection. So as a consumer, one of the interesting things about the internet is it's very hard, certainly for a consumer, to know what's gone wrong. Somebody somewhere along the line has decided that, have I used up too much karma? Have I been, is it that somewhere there is one of the companies that does the trunk, what's gone wrong? If it's just the connection is broken down, I can do a trace route. This is not something my mom would have done, but I can do a trace route, and I can find out when the thing's completely broken. But when it's just slowed down, it's really hard. So it don't we need more accountability in the internet itself, so that my video conferencing software can tell me don't we need to instrument the internet itself to be able to find out who's responsible for who can we blame?
So it's going to be an interesting, you can see what's happening here. We are exploring a future landscape which is largely unexplored, and every one of us is going to experience this, which brings me to another point. Internet was designed to be non-national in character. The internet address space doesn't refer to countries, even though domain names, which is at another layer in the architecture, has reference to country codes, but it also has reference to generics like .com and .net. So there are transborder effects that ride on top of the internet and manifest themselves in the World Wide Web. One of the questions which I hope President Ilves will discuss later after us is how we cope with some of those transborder effects that are emerging out of this online environment. Things like abuse, crime, other harms that occur. How do you think that we should be thinking about those problems? I mean, do we think about just technical solutions? What do we do about transborder law enforcement?
No.
What's the right way to frame?
You shouldn't just be thinking technical solutions. And I think the point is you can't, many countries will take the attitude that they want to control the internet in their country. And I think there are huge risks, I think there are huge threats on the open internet. Geopolitical, economic. We don't have digital trade barriers on the internet at the moment. We could have those in the future. The whole idea of how you tax the big companies is just one of the simplest things to think about. Things about how you deal with crime internationally, and how you've got to take into account the cultural norms within the countries you're dealing with. We can't assume everyone is going to be like us on the internet.
Yeah.
It's so important to take account of those internet norms. And that, when you go to the Middle East and places like that, the culture is so different. And that's my plea: is we, just as the Human Rights United Nations Charter did that, and it's broken in different areas, but at least there's a charter that people can be held account to. That's what we need, and it's got to be global.
I suppose that there's two traps in a way. The first trap is to think that the web, the internet, because it doesn't officially wasn't built with boundaries with nations. That nations aren't a thing we can treat. In fact, so that our second approximation is to think, okay, we should treat these as different national cultures.
Exactly.
But then, when you treat them as national cultures, of course, in fact, when you're looking at a culture, you think of that you're looking at a culture in a country, but that country is horribly divided. So in fact, you have two countries. And it may be that the countries of the left to right in this country, there's a huge diaspora of people who align very, very strongly against the Republican-Democrat divide there. There are countries we think of as being Arabic countries, but actually within they are horribly divided along with religious lines. And so in fact, the countries you're talking about, which are warring against each other, may not, even if the country is no more, if the country is invaded and gobbled up, still, the cultures and the different, often religious-based, but not always religious-based, ideas that people will hold in common with each other to the extent that they will bitterly resent everybody else who doesn't hold them. And I think we also have to be concerned about those not having borders, and those also not only being naturally occurring, but also those being communities of people who have horrible, nasty thoughts because they've been manipulated by organized crime into having those nasty thoughts in order to deliberately achieve some aim. So yes, it's about culture and emergent culture and manipulated culture, but it might be simplistic to assume that it will naturally always match the country boundary.
Yeah, and it's an opportunity to think outside of the country boundaries as well as we go forward.
Well, so this in a sense, as we think about these things, I think I perceive a kind of fragmentation that is going to emerge out of all this. And it worries me because even though you can understand some of the dynamics of that fragmentation, one of the most valuable features of the World Wide Web is that you could pretty much refer to anything that you wanted to refer to. And so the interconnectedness of it has been part of its core value. And yet we see these other forces leading to potential fragmentation. So when you think about the abuse problem, the sort of transborder problems, I can only think of three basic ways of coping with these things. One of them is technical means to inhibit particular abuses, and if we can stop them technically, that's valuable. The second one is to say, if we catch you doing this, there'll be consequences. That's a post hoc kind of law enforcement made more complicated by transborder events. And then the third one is moral suasion. Don't do that, it's just wrong. And I know that sounds wimpy, but have you ever noticed that gravity is the weakest force in the universe, but when you get enough mass, it's very powerful. It keeps us from flying off the planet. And so if you get enough people in a social setting to agree that these behaviors are not acceptable, then social pressure can be quite powerful. Exactly. But I think we have to exercise a lot of those mechanisms.
But there's nuances in this. So, for example, just taking the world, our government is saying to Facebook, it's up to you to take stuff online that we consider dangerous. Or why should Facebook become our censor?
And do you want?
Is that right that a company like Facebook should be censoring what we see? I mean, we all we have problems with China censoring, and with the internet's already fragmented behind the firewall. But you've got 1.3 billion people most of whom don't speak English, and they're quite happy in their Chinese internet. But are we going to delegate to companies what we can and can't see on the internet?
I'm sorry, I haven't lost interest, but I just realized that there are some questions here. Here's a question. It says, how can we create an even greater and more diverse community that can collaborate to advance the internet towards increasing social and economic opportunity? So what steps?
By the way, just from the point of view of accessibility, you should, if you're designing systems, always go for the maximum font size that you can. Never deliberately start off by saying font size equals 80% because you think it'll look cuter, because you'll get more, so you should in general, and when you're using a web browser, you can always do Command 0 on a Mac. We'll say, take me back to the size that I like. And by the way, if you're feeding questions to people on stage, same thing applies. Just maybe try Apple Plus a few times. You've got a large screen there. You can use it, fill it with one of those simple accessibility things. Font sizes sort of less than 3. Just use examples are always teaching moments that crop up every moment.
So let's try to do one more before we run out of time. We
I
only have a
wouldn't
minute.
take
It
one
says,
from anyone who signs themselves as anonymous.
it says, what do pioneers see on the horizon
Do
as
it.
the greatest challenge, both technical and political, in the next 5 to 10 years with the continued growth of the internet in 1 minute or less? Anybody have a comment about that? I'll tell you what, one reaction I have on the technical side is that we need better technology, better use of cryptography in order to protect people's privacy and safety. But we're going to have to make it work at scale. And key management will turn out to be the biggest headache imaginable. So that's my worry, is trying to get that piece of technology to work well. What else?
Yeah, I would say, dear Anonymous, it's complicated. Go to the contact for the web, go to webfoundation.org/for-the-web, and there you will see quite a large community's attempt to enumerate those things. And you ask me a list of those, what the challenges are. There's a list. There's a list of 9 principles which guide those things, and then you, dear Anonymous, can participate in the discussion which is happening over the next 6 months or so, where we're trying to figure out if we know some of the things we need to do, but we don't. But some of them are complicated. So the answer to those things are complicated. It's easy to come out with the principles, which we've done, but then understanding the wording, which actually means what different people to commit to in order to tackle those challenges, is something which you can participate in.
So we are flat out of time, but let me thank our 2 panelists and thank you for questions. Appreciate it, as always. Thank you very much, Tim.